Hi everyone, this is a really quick video to demonstrate how to solve the problem with the Dyson Cinetic Big Ball Animal Pro cord rewind mechanism. So the first step that we're going to do now is to take off this portion, which is where all the dust gets collected. So let's just release that off and keep that aside. Now what we're going to do is a couple of things. We're going to take off this screw out here, so we take off that portion. We're going to take off this screw out here, so we take off this portion, and then inside that and over here there are a couple of screws which you're going to remove off as well. So now we're going to take off these two screws here and the screws on the sides, on either sides. But to do that, we need this sort of special type of screwdriver. There are two options. Either we can use the special type of screwdriver, or you can use a sort of flat screwdriver. So I'm going to show you both. So that's the special type of screwdriver. Or we're going to use a flat screwdriver such as this. So now we've removed the screws from here, there. We've done the same thing on the other side, and then we've removed two screws out here, two out here, and two out here. So we've removed all the screws out, and now we need to sort of open this section. So the way to do that is hold this down and just gently lift up this section, and that will come out quite easily. And so that's the top section. We just make sure we keep that aside safely. We don't need it right now. And that's the mechanism inside. So what we want to do right now is this mechanism where the spring is coiled, and you can see that spring is sort of come off. And you can see that very easily. I'm going to point to it. This is the spring, and that spring is come off from where it needs to be, and that's why it's not winding through. So what we need to do is we need to take off this section. But first, to do that, we need to take off this part. And once we've got this part off, we can then take off this section. And when we take off this section, we've got to get the coil set in place. And once we get that spring coil set in place, then we put everything back together. So now that we've taken off 1, 2, and 3 screws, it's going to remain in those holes out there because the screws are deep in. We just want to lift this portion out from you, and it's connected to the wire, so you have to be careful. So what we're going to do is we're going to just lift that off there quite gently, and you'll notice that when we lift that, it's not that easy because there's another little connection that you can see there that is connected. That's a screw in there that we'll need to see, and that's a screw right in there that you want to take off, this screw. So if you sort of move the camera back a little bit, you'll be able to see this component has to come off. We've taken off that screw, and now we need to take off this screw. So now we're going to take off this component that we've taken off the screw off from there. And that's out. And now that we've got that out, we'll probably need to take off the screws from here. And we've got one more there, and we've got one more in that corner there to take off this component, because only when we take that off, which is where the wire wraps in through, can we then remove this component and set that in place. And once that's set in place, we put everything back. So a quick capture of what we've done is we've taken off these 3 screws, and we've managed to take off this unit. And then we've taken off the screws in there, that's 1, 2, and 3. And so we want to take off this unit to access the spring mechanism there. So what we're going to do is gently now move that out from here, and as you can see, it sort of slides in, so you got to pull it out, and that's how it sort of slides out. And now we've managed to take off the whole mechanism. So that's what we've got. We've got this mechanism. Ideally, you shouldn't pull beyond the red. Ideally, you shouldn't pull beyond the yellow. And what generally happens is people tend to forget when they're vacuuming. They just pull out the cable it goes beyond the yellow, it goes beyond the red, and that's when the spring mechanism gets into disaster mode. So here's a quick look at the spring mechanism that you can see. And I'm going to show you, there's a little notch out there. And so this spring mechanism, we've got to get onto that notch. That's all. And once we get it back onto that notch, we'll then get it back in place and get the cable rolled back again so it's back into its mode. So this process is a little bit, it takes, you got to do it very, very carefully so that the spring doesn't come out from where it is. And once that's done, it's pretty easy. So I'm going to do the spring mechanism now. And yep, that's the next step that we're going to be getting done. So we've now put the spring mechanism back into the notch by just getting it under this sort of belt and moving it there, and then just sliding it into the notch and getting it in the notch there. That's all. And once it's in the notch, we can now move this, put this back into place, and then get the cable tied back in again. So we now, okay, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that this is completely wrapped around that, and it's sort of untangled around that, which means to do that, you're actually spinning it in the anti-clockwise direction. Okay, so what we're doing is we're spinning this, like you can see, in the anti-clockwise direction, and by doing that, and it's really a slow process, but by doing that, you're getting this portion tightened around the spring coil mechanism, and so when you release it, it will wrap back up in again. So this, you want to have a very small belt of steel out here, and you want to have a belt of steel right around this portion as well. And so what we're going to do now, as you can see, is I'm just going to pull back this cable, and I'm going to slide this in here sort of very carefully. So I'm just going to slide it in there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to hold this portion in place while we fix this mechanism. If you release it, it'll all coil back in again. And so you don't want it happening till you put this mechanism, because this is kind of like a stock mechanism in place. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to lift this up carefully, very carefully, while we keep the tension flowing out here. And then you want to put this mechanism back out there, get the bigger screw and get that back in there. And let's tighten the screw, not all the way down to about 80% down, because you want to put the other screw in place as well, and then tighten both together. And now carefully, by lifting that with your 2 fingers, get the screw in place and hold that up with 2 fingers. Hold this mechanism down this way as such, and then use the screwdriver to tighten the bottom screw. And once you've tightened the bottom screw, you can now tighten the top screw. And so what you now have in place, and should be, if you leave that, it should be all locked in place. And that's good, because you want that sort of locked in place, So now if you release, you should see that it springs back and it recoils the whole thing. So now, before you get it recoiled, just make sure that the whole cable is sort of untangled and it's not, tangly, so that it's easy to kind of coil back. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it, roll it out all the way lengthwise to uncoil it. Stop. Now we're just going to tighten these screws. That's tight. That's tight. And that's tight. And now that we put the screws back, we're just going to test this mechanism before we close out everything. So we're just going to release this button out here, which is essentially the button that is going to be from this button out here. So this button out here presses this section down here, and we want to make sure that it does it right and that the cable gets wrapped back in again. So hold it very closely like a loop out here and release this, and you can see it's coming through quite well. So you don't want to put too much pressure, you want to do that carefully. And you can see how the spring mechanism, as I do that, you can see how the spring mechanism works as well, and how that's sort of all wrapping in there. Yep, so we're gonna just release that. Yeah, and we're gonna just get some cable released so it's easy, and then have a look at the spring mechanism out here while I get that done. Stop. Ken, how are you shooting a video, darling? Gone in place, and we want to just get this rubber valve outside properly. It takes a bit of a pull, but yeah, we've got that all in place now, and we want to make sure the one behind there is good. Right, as you can see, that's gone in place well. This has gone in place well, and we're now going to get the screws put in. So the first thing that we're going to do is start taking the screws and put them in place here. So now that we've got the final part ready, the only thing left is putting the sort of wheels back in place. So we do that by getting this put here in the center, feel it in place, and then it sort of just slides in there. And we'll get the screw in there and make sure we put that in there very well. To do is take that mechanism and see that it goes back in there well. As you can see, that all fits back in there and well, and that's done. Now the only thing left to do is test it and see that it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the cable out a little bit, and when you do that carefully, and that's it. And we're going to test that it goes back. So we're going to press the release button, and as you can see, that goes back perfectly well. So that's a job done. And you can do this yourself if you have a problem with your cable coming out from your Dyson Big Ball Animal Pro. Thank you.